For anyone who has followed my channel, they'll be aware that I do a variety of videos. Mostly they are biographical in nature or cover historical events from any given period in the medieval age. But I also post quiz videos to test the knowledge of viewers. And today's video is a variation on the latter. Here I'll show an image or depiction of a figure from medieval history, and it's up to the viewers to guess who they are. On the right hand side of the screen, there'll be 3 clues to help. The answer will be revealed on the next slide with a brief overview of the person in question. The images that I use will usually either be contemporary or near contemporary. However, occasionally, some of the depictions will be from a much later date. I'll explain the age of the image when I reveal the answer. In all, there'll be 5 images to guess. Who am I? My birth name was Lotario del Conte de Segni. I am arguably medieval history's most famous pope. I annulled the Magna Carta. The answer is Pope Innocent III. The image dates from the mid-1200s. Innocent was certainly one of the most famous popes from medieval history. He was a strong advocate of the Crusades, promoting supposed holy war not just in the East, but in Western Europe as well, fighting so-called heresy in southern France, and supporting Christian efforts to reconquer Spain from the Muslims. Innocent also called for the Fourth Crusade, which ended with the sacking of Constantinople. Innocent also had an interesting relationship with King John of England. John had refused to accept Stephen Langton as Archbishop of Canterbury, which led to Innocent excommunicating him. But John kept making enemies and needed Innocent's support. He backed down, and in 1215 the Pope declared the Magna Carta null and void. Who am I? My father was King Louis VII of France. I am sometimes referred to as Augustus. I was a leader of the Third Crusade. The answer is Philip II of France. The image dates about a century after Philip's death. Philip is probably France's greatest medieval king. He dismantled the Angevin Empire that had been built up by King Henry II of England, although he had to bide his time to do so. Philip, alongside Henry's son Richard the Lionheart, fought on the Third Crusade, although Philip abandoned the venture early as he plainly hoped to seize Richard's lands in France whilst he was occupied in the Holy Land. Richard knew full well what Philip was up to, and he eventually returned after nearly 2 years being held hostage by the Holy Roman Emperor, and he waged war against Philip. Philip's hopes, though, were boosted by Richard's unexpected death in 1199, and the French king would be presented with the much less daunting prospect of King John as a rival. In 1214, Philip cemented his superiority by defeating John and Emperor Otto IV at the Battle of Bouvines. Who am I? My first husband was a 15th century King of England. I was a central figure in the Wars of the Roses. I formed an alliance with a hated enemy to try and stay in power. The answer is Margaret of Anjou. The image is a contemporary depiction of her. Margaret was the queen of Henry VI of England, whom she married in 1445. Henry, famously, was a docile man who had a mental breakdown in 1453, as England finally succumbed in the Hundred Years' War. Power-hungry enemies, including Richard Duke of York, began to turn on the king. But even after he had recovered from his illness, Henry was not strong enough to withstand the pressure of ruling by himself, and it was up to Margaret to try and fend off their enemies. In 1461, Henry and Margaret fell from power after being defeated at Towton by the man who now became Edward IV. A decade in the political wilderness followed before Margaret formed an unlikely alliance with the Earl of Warwick, whom she absolutely despised. The two now had a common enemy in Edward IV, as Warwick had been betrayed by the king. Their plot to overthrow Edward worked initially for a short time, forcing him into exile, but Edward returned, reclaimed the crown, and killed Warwick at Barnet and Henry and Margaret's one son at the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471. He then murdered Henry at the Tower of London shortly after. Margaret, finally and totally defeated, was paraded in humiliating fashion through the streets of London by Edward. Who am I? I was one of the leaders of the First Crusade. I declared myself Prince of Antioch. The chronicler Anna Komnene said the sight of me inspired both terror and admiration. The answer is Bohemond of Taranto. The image of Bohemond is a portrait from the 1800s. As Pope Urban II spread his message of crusade across Europe, Bohemond of Taranto was busy taking part in a siege in Italy. Word soon got to him, though, about the crusade, and Bohemond dropped what he was doing and immediately began to make preparations to join the crusade. Although religious motivations for most of the crusaders was absolutely genuine, many also sensed an opportunity to make themselves rich beyond anything they could hope for in Europe. Bohemond, a man of the world, being one of them. Anna Komnene's physical description of Bohemond would indicate he was an ideal candidate for a crusade. He was tall and powerfully built, and he cut an intimidating figure. The capture of Antioch in 1098 gave Bohemond the opportunity he was looking for, and he set himself up as prince, much to the anger of the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, Anna's father. The next few years saw Bohemond at odds with Alexios, with Bohemond calling the emperor a mad heretic. Bohemond looked for support in Europe, even travelling as far as England, where the king, Henry I, refused him entry. Bohemond was ultimately bested by Alexios in their dispute, and he died in 1111. Who am I? I am one of England's most important early kings. Both my father and son are two very famous kings themselves. In 910, I defeated a Viking army at the Battle of Tettenhall. The answer is Edward the Elder. The image is from the 1200s. Edward was a highly capable king and a very important figure in early English history. He expanded on his father's, Alfred the Great's, gains in the Viking Wars by capturing areas across the country and strengthening regions already under his control by building new castles and fortifications. His victory over the Vikings at the Battle of Tettenhall also brought some welcome stability in the far north of England. Although Edward's name isn't as recognised or as glamorous as that of his father or of his son and successor Athelstan, his value in England's early history should not be underestimated. I do hope you enjoyed that little game. The idea behind it is in keeping with how I want to run this channel. I'm trying to give people as many ways to learn about medieval history as possible. Everybody learns differently, so having the odd quiz and game, I think, is a good way of helping people to remember key information. What I am acutely aware of is that there is a lot of information involved in history content, and it is impossible to remember even most of it, never mind all of it. If you found this format beneficial, do let me know in the comments, and I'll try and do more in the future. If you haven't already, do hit the like and subscribe button, and also please check out my Patreon page to support my work, link in the comments.